Well, just like Canada, Mexico is also bracing for an economic hit from Donald Trump.
Colaboramos, pero nunca nos subordinemos.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has laid out her country's plan to meet one of Trump's demands to reduce their imports from China. Canada, meanwhile, is throwing a little over $1 billion at the border to appease Trump. The key question remains for both countries, are these efforts enough? Kenneth Smith-Ramos is Mexico's former chief negotiator for the modernization of NAFTA and now a partner at Aegon, and he joins me now. It's good to see you again, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, David, for the invitation.
There is a great deal of anxiety in this country about what could come on Monday and absolutely no certainty about what could come on Monday. What is the mood from the Mexican perspective right now?
Well, I think it's very similar. I think the Mexican government and the Mexican private sector is sort of bracing for whatever scenarios we may face beginning next week with the arrival of President Trump. I think the Mexican government has been working on a strategy which is twofold, which is on the one hand, to really be vigilant that the USMCA is not violated. President Sheinbaum has been clear in stating that if the U.S. unilaterally increases tariffs on Mexican exports, that would represent a violation of the USMCA and that Mexico would have to retaliate. So I know for a fact that there is work going on in Mexico on a potential retaliation list, taking as an example the lists and the retaliation that Mexico has enacted in the past, in the previous administration for President Trump and in previous years vis-a-vis the United States. So that's one side. And on the other side, you know, the key objective for Mexico is to basically try to defuse the tariff threat right now. And that involves, without a doubt, what also the Mexican government has been saying, which is establishing a positive foreign policy dialogue with the United States on key issues such as immigration and security, drug trafficking. So I think those are the areas where the government is focusing the efforts, as well as dealing with what will come later, which is the entire discussion on USMCA and its review in 2026, what role does China play in those discussions, etc.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to what Canada has done, though the issues with migrants, obviously, and the border are very different up here in terms of scale and fentanyl as well, right? So it's try to work with the incoming administration on those issues to buy some time or get a reprieve, but be ready to hit back if you need to. And the sense we have from the Canadian government is it's not going to be dollar for dollar retaliation, because that's a trade war Canada can't win. You know, and they would hit very specific strategic sectors of the American economy. Is that where it's going in Mexico, or do you think it could end up trying to go dollar for dollar with the biggest economy on the planet?
Yeah, I think a lot will depend on what actual measures the United States announces and actually implements, because there's been a lot of talk in Washington about whether President Trump will go ahead and apply 25% tariffs across the board on all products traded with Mexico and Canada, which would be really extreme, and it will amount essentially to suspending the USMCA for whatever time those tariffs are in place. What we've also been hearing is perhaps a more strategic approach that could involve, yes, imposing tariffs, but in certain sectors, key sectors for export for Mexico, perhaps the same for Canada. And as the president said during his campaign, you know, the last days of the campaign, he said that he would increase tariffs and continue increasing them until he gets results, quote unquote. And so that's another possibility. And so based on whatever measures the United States takes, I think the Mexican government will react. Obviously, in a retaliation, it's very hard to go tit for tat with the United States. And most importantly, whatever occurs in terms of retaliation and tariffs that the U.S. may impose, the strategy in the Mexican government must be to try to make this as short-lived as possible. So in other words, get to this constructive dialogue that the Mexican government is talking about on immigration, on security, on China. I think the Mexican government, through individual unilateral actions in Mexico, has already sent signals to the U.S., you know, with big captures of shipments of fentanyl, for example, with increasing tariffs on China, other measures that are being taken on immigration. The idea is to send the signal that Mexico will be firm on not allowing, you know, the U.S. a free pass, so to speak, if it violates the agreement, but at the same time, the willingness to address all of these important issues for North America.
What kind of signals is the Mexican government and the Mexican private sector getting in terms of how these these efforts are being received? Because I know there's been moves on fentanyl, as you say, and on migrants, and some efforts to reduce the amount of Chinese goods coming in, including crackdowns on companies that sell them. Canada's done a bunch of things on the border. We're told it's been well received by the people who were part of the administration, but nobody truly knows how Donald Trump feels about it. What's the signal that Mexico has received on its efforts and how those are being viewed?
Exactly. You said something that's very important. How does the president-elect actually see these things? Precisely because of the hierarchical way that he operates. You know, his operatives, his cabinet may think one thing, but if he hears something in the news or gets a certain perception from someone, that may change completely the policy of the U.S. What we are hearing is that, you know, in the Washington, D.C. circle, let's say, you know, in think tanks, media, people that are close to the government and to the transition team, these signals are seen as positive. You know, we are starting from, let's say, frankly, a very low point of cooperation on security, for example, with the previous administration, with the López Obrador administration. And President Sheinbaum has taken strong actions against cartels already. Like I said, intercepting shipments of drugs, sending her equivalent of a drug czar to spend time, a substantial amount of time in the state of Sinaloa, where there's a lot of cartel activity. So I think those things are being received positively in the U.S. Also, what Mexico is trying to do and will try to do on immigration and on China. But it remains to be seen once President Trump comes into power, and of course, once his government apparatus is in place and the officials that will be in charge of the actual day-to-day negotiating with Mexico, what are the positions that they will be taking. But I think it's a positive step on the international side that President Sheinbaum is sending these signals, and domestically, the private sector is happy also because, or at least satisfied with what has been announced this week, which is a major economic growth program for the administration of Claudia Sheinbaum, called the Mexico Plan. And this is directly linked to how Mexico will try to portray itself as a strong and important ally of the United States on the economic front as well.
Are you worried, though, that Donald Trump looks at what Mexico has done and looks at what Canada has done? He's never, without him even having imposed a single tariff or taken the oath of office, he's gotten all of this movement, and he said jump and everybody jumped, that it incentivizes him to further drastic threats and even bigger demands for change. Because you reward the bully, you get bullied some more, it seems.
That's a very good point, and it's a very fine line. You know, you can't sort of break the dialogue or try to walk away from what will be a very substantive and important discussion with the Trump administration. At the same time, if you give too many concessions right up front, I mean, I know for a fact, because I lived it when we negotiated the USMCA, he will just double down and keep asking more and more and more. So that is the fine line and sort of the equalizing effect that Mexico has to find the right mix of willingness to sit down and to work constructively, but at the same time stand your ground, you know, and draw very clear red lines on certain issues. And I think that's why it's very important that President Sheinbaum sent this signal that if there's a violation of the USMCA, Mexico has to retaliate and to generate economic impact in the United States, because that's what helped us back in also with Canada in 2018 when the U.S. raised tariffs on steel and aluminum. Within 3 weeks, Mexico had implemented retaliation, and within the discussions on the USMCA, Mexico and Canada were excluded from national security measures in the automotive sector. So that's an example that you have to sort of stand up to the big guy and say, you know, we are willing to negotiate, but we will also stand firm on our principles.
I wonder if I can squeeze in one more question with you, because you were part of a trade negotiation last time. This isn't a trade negotiation as much as it's like a trade war. You know what I mean? Like, at least the threat of a potential trade war. So does that change your approach? Because in a negotiation, you're exchanging positions and I get a clear sense of objectives, and there's clarity and data going back and forth, and sort of a bottom line takes hold, I would presume, in the conversation. Do you have to approach something like this completely differently than a standard trade renegotiation or negotiation deal?
Well, I don't think you have to address it radically differently. There are different conditions than what we faced in USMCA in 2018. Obviously, this mixing up that Trump is doing on tariffs, threats with immigration and security. But let's remember that in 2017 and 2018, there was this constant threat by President Trump that he was going to pull out of the NAFTA at the time, which would have amounted to a major trade war or cancellation of this very important economic growth mechanism for Mexico. So we were under severe threat back then. There was a talk of paying for the border wall, etc. So there are parallels to what we lived through in 2017, 2018 in the USMCA negotiation. And I think that Mexico needs to try to separate. It will be difficult with Trump, but try to separate the discussion, the immediate discussion on diffusing the threat tariff and dealing with immigration and security. And then after that, really getting into the details as to what we want to obtain in the USMCA review in 2026. Because if you bunch everything up together, I agree with you. It gets very complicated to obtain solid economic results if you're also having to deal with fentanyl, with immigration, etc., in the same negotiating table.
Kenneth Smith-Ramos, always appreciate the time. Thank you for being here today, sir. And we're going to have an interesting week next week. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure.